The journey from just hello to being fluent in English. Jake was a boy with wide, hopeful eyes and a dream as big as the world. Jake's struggle with learning English was a journey that would define him in ways he couldn't have imagined. Born in a small village where his native language was spoken exclusively, Jake had never heard English until his family moved to a bustling city when he was 8 years old. Everything seemed different, the noise, the people, and the language. Jake found himself in a strange classroom on his first day, surrounded by kids whose words flowed like water, so easily and naturally, while he felt lost, stranded in a sea of foreign sounds. At first, he tried to ignore the distance he felt from his classmates. They laughed and played together, and sometimes they'd look at him, curious, but never unkind. Yet Jake felt as if an invisible wall separated him from them. He didn't know how to join in, how to make friends, how to feel like he belonged. "English isn't so hard," his teacher, Mrs. Turner, would encourage him with a soft smile. She was patient, sitting beside him and helping him sound out words that felt twisted and unnatural on his tongue. But Jake would shake his head, struggling to understand the meanings of words and the rules that seemed so confusing. He could see other students learning fast, reading books and writing sentences easily, while he was stuck on letters and sounds. His mom would watch him study, brow furrowed as he flipped through his English workbooks. He'd get frustrated and push the books away, shaking his head. He knew his family had moved for a better future, yet it felt like the future would never come if he couldn't speak the language that held him back. "You're smart, Jake," she'd say, hugging him close, "just give it time." But time felt like his enemy. His grades dipped, and he dreaded every reading assignment. The gap between him and his classmates seemed to widen each year. He stopped raising his hand in class, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Some kids even started teasing him. "Jake the faker," they'd whisper, laughing as he stumbled over his words. One day, after another lonely lunch break, he overheard a group of kids planning a trip to the library. They were talking about an exciting new book series. Curiosity nudged him, and with hesitant steps, he followed them inside. Shelves lined the room, overflowing with books, all in English, and though he didn't know it then, this library would become his sanctuary. The librarian, Ms. Reed, noticed him wandering and asked if he needed help. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. Jake, unsure but hopeful, asked her to recommend a book that would be easy but fun. She pulled a children's novel off the shelf, a story about a boy who felt out of place but eventually found his own path. Jake could relate instantly, and though he didn't understand all the words, he could follow enough of the story. That book led to another, then another. With every new book, he felt a little more confident, a little more capable. He'd visit the library every day after school, where Ms. Reed would recommend more books, each slightly more challenging than the last. She encouraged him to read aloud, helping him with pronunciation and explaining words that didn't make sense. Sometimes they'd read together, laughing over the funny parts or discussing what might happen next in the story. As the months passed, Jake noticed he was catching on faster, understanding conversations more easily, and even picking up phrases and expressions without thinking about it. His classmates began noticing the change, too. "Wow, Jake, your English got so good," one of his classmates said one day. Jake blushed but smiled, a rare pride bubbling up. By the time he reached high school, Jake was no longer the quiet kid struggling with his words. He'd grown to love language so much that he joined the school's debate club. He started speaking up, not just in class but also in competitions. His speeches were powerful, and his stories captivated people. He shared with his classmates tales of his journey, about the struggles of learning a new language, and he didn't hold back the parts that were difficult, the nights when he'd almost given up. But the moment he knew he'd truly overcome his struggle came during a school assembly. His English teacher asked him to read a poem he'd written, about finding his voice and his journey through words. As he stood on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces, Jake read each line with confidence and clarity. Every word felt like a victory, a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. By the end of high school, Jake was fluent. Fluent, not just in words, but in confidence, in self-belief. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. English had once been a barrier, but now it was a bridge, connecting him to a world he could embrace with open arms. His journey had been hard, but as he stood on the threshold of his next chapter, he knew he was ready for anything.